Hello you cursed undead, it's Rusty here. Today I'm going to be playing Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin, which was developed by From Software and published by Bandai Namco, released in 2015. Now the parentheses is quite important there because you can also buy Dark Souls 2 on Steam, and that came out in 2014, but this one is an enhanced 64-bit version with updated graphics and features. In fact, they describe it as a director's cut of the game, because as well as the enhanced visuals and the better optimization, it's got different enemy types, some different enemy placements, and certain items are placed differently as well. And it also includes all the DLC for Dark Souls 2, which is endgame content, so I won't be covering that in my first impressions. So this one is the Dark Sheep of the Dark Souls family. I'm not quite sure why. I think it might have something to do with creative director Miyazaki not being heavily involved, because he was off making Bloodborne at the time, and he's kind of seen as the spark for these games. So we will be discussing and contrasting this game with those during my first impressions, because I only think it's fair, and because I played this one last. I played them a bit out of order, maybe because of that reputation it's got. But anyway, let's begin the game. Yes, welcome to Majula, which serves as your hub town, or more like hamlet, in the game. You might be thinking, if this is your first look at a Dark Souls game, if you've never played one before, what is it all about? Well, the story in this one, it's kind of vague as usual, but I like it in a way that it's a bit more direct as well. You get quite an exposition-y intro cutscene, and then like other Dark Souls games, you're basically just left to go through the game. The NPCs don't provide much in the way of exposition. But you're in the world of Drangleic, and you are a cursed undead. My guy looks a bit like a zombie now. But these cursed undead come to this world because they're essentially... they're cursed to go hollow. That's my state now, hollow. And you just wind up here along with a lot of other undead. I'm pretty sure everyone else here is undead. The enemies definitely are, but they've gone hollow, which is this state you get when you die. And you turn up here, and this lady, the Emerald Herald, basically just gives you a task to collect souls, because souls can stop you going hollow. Really, they're the in-game currency. You can see in the bottom right of the screen I've got quite a lot now. I'm going to level up soon. But I just like the direct explanation of, you know, this is the plot. This is what's going to happen. This is what the undead and hollows are. It's more direct. I like it. It's more traditional fantasy. Maybe it worked better in Dark Souls 1 not having that directness. But here, it's kind of refreshing, to be honest. And I'm gonna be comparing them, like I said. But in story stakes, I don't even know if it's connected to the other two games, other than the obvious themes of rebirth and death and hollows. But the first game took place in Lordran, and this takes place, as I said, in Drangleic, so... bearer seeks lest. Anyway, this is where you level up, so I'm going to show you that now. In the previous games, well, in the first game and Dark Souls 3, you'd have firekeepers and a handmaiden who leveled you up. I think you leveled up in the bonfire at the first game, actually. You could do it at any bonfire, because you didn't have warping in that game. But we're going to level up and you'll see the stats screen. Now, each level costs more souls, and you get souls from defeated enemies. Tougher the enemy, you tend to get more souls. You get the most from bosses, obviously. But these are your main stats. And in Dark Souls 1, there was one called Resistance that was completely useless. This game of the three, I think, I thought about what I'm putting points into the most. So I think this is the best in terms of stats. It's got a new one called Adaptability, which raises, as you can see there, it raises your agility, which speeds up all your actions, rolling, blocking, parrying, and drinking Estus, which is your health potion. So that is quite an important stat, and I started putting a lot in it, and I'm a sorcerer, so I put quite a lot in intelligence, which does more magic damage. One thing I will say about this screen is I need to look at a lot of these stats. In Dark Souls 3 there was a written description of what it was, but you have to press help, because there's so much going on here. You're like, well, what does that do? What does that mean? So it is confusing to new players. Poise is another one that's quite important. That, yeah, the ability to withstand the impact of attacks. So when you press help, it tells you what all these do. And you basically, you do have classes. There's a choice of classes at the start, but you tend to want to build it around that starting class, because it affects what stats you start with. But you can do whatever you want. You can do a knight who uses sorcery or pyromancy, or you can be a swordsman who is really high dexterity. These stats basically control what weapons you use. So I've been putting some into strength, but because I'm a magic user, I'm putting quite a lot into that. I haven't done magic before. I've done pyromancy in Dark Souls 3, but it's the first time I've been doing magic. Now, attunement tells you how many spell slots you can use, so even if I put 2 into it there, it didn't put my slots up. It's still on 3, so I'm not going to bother with that now. We will do more adaptability, because I'm drinking potions quite slow. I need to put some into faith, because I might want to use some miracles later. They're more your priest spells, like healing. Endurance is important for stamina. Stamina, every move you do, rolling, attacking with magic or a weapon, costs stamina, and blocking costs stamina. So, and that's just health. And that's your, is that your equipment load? Yes. So there's lots of stats to do. You probably want to read a guide before you do this, but I don't want to spend too much time on it, so that'll do. Let's go up to 20. Yep, confirm. Okay. So you see all my souls just gone there. You might think I was quite a high level there, but by the end of the game I'll probably be near level 100 once I've done the DLC. Here is your bonfire. This is where you can do a number of things, but in Dark Souls 2 and 3 you have instant warp, which is kind of like fast travel, and that's changed quite a bit about the game. And I'll talk about the level design, but not yet. You can also do several other things here, like burn human effigies, which basically closes off the PvP for a bit. I can't really do PvP at the moment anyway, because I am hollowed, so we'll undo that for now. You can also swap out items and store them here. Right, let's go into the inventory and show you the effigy. This is quite cluttered. Like the level up screen is quite confusing, this is quite cluttered. It's not the best it can be, honestly. It might work a bit better for a mouse, but playing the game with mouse and keyboard is just a nightmare. So anyway, I'm going to use one of these. This stops me being hollow. You'll notice my appearance change when I use it. My humanity is restored. And what that means is, because when you die, you turn hollow. And if you die a number of times without resorting to using an effigy, you start to lose your maximum health. As you can see there, when I use that, some of my health bars are gone now, because I died a number of times and hadn't used the effigy for a while. And that doesn't happen in the other games. When you die and go hollow, you don't lose health eventually. I don't know if I like the feature, really. It kind of makes dying more of a risk, and you have to use those human effigies quite sparingly, so I guess it is quite a good feature. Makes the game a little bit more difficult. But you can get an item, which is, I think I've got a ring. Yeah, Ring of Binding. Whoops, it's gone now. Which, essentially, yeah, an unusual ring, limits the wearer's HP reduction. I think the maximum reduction you can have is 50%. I don't know how many deaths you have to undergo for that to happen, but we'll put this on instead because it increases my poise, and I'm a mage, so poise is quite handy. A poise ring anyway, because I'm wearing light armor. Talk about that with this blacksmith guy. If I can get the old talk button up, I forgot to get rid of that. So, this, as well as spending souls on leveling up, this is probably even more important. Reinforcing your weapons and your armor. When you do it for armor, it obviously increases the various resistances, and for weapons it increases the various damages. Basically usually does standard attack, but you can also do it for magic as well. You need shards to do it as well as souls, and they're semi-rare at the moment. So, but I found, yeah, sorry, they always say that when you don't buy anything or do anything with them. I have found, unlike in Dark Souls 3, more like Dark Souls 1, that I keep swapping out weapons more than I did in 3. I basically just use my starting sword because it was the quickest, whereas I'm finding I'm using different weapon types in this. It might be because I'm a mage and I can't use many of them, because a lot of them require fairly high strength or dexterity. So I tend to just use this. And there's a number of other merchants and stuff here. You meet them along your journey and they end up here. And just want to talk about the visuals a minute, because each game is fairly unique. They've all got a sort of style. They've all got the same kind of aesthetic in terms of armor types and hollowing. There's all sorts of similarities, but I don't know if it's because of the tech, but each kind of feels a bit different. Like Dark Souls 1 was quite painterly. It was still dark and atmospheric visually. And Dark Souls 3 maybe a bit more realistic, a bit more sort of rotten, everything feels decaying. And there was very gothic architecture. And this one, I don't know, it feels a bit like that. It feels a bit more softer, a bit more warmer. It's not to say there's not a dark tone there, but it feels more traditional fantasy, like I said with the story as well, in terms of its visuals and maybe even tone. Because even some of the characters are a bit more light-hearted. There's still that dark undertone, obviously. I mean, you are an undead. But where it doesn't shine, in the visual style at least, is in the enemy design. And we'll get to that, and I'll talk about the level design as well. As we're going, I was going to warp, but I think it'd be better if I talk about it while I show you, because it's quite linear. Almost literally in some ways. Even though the hub, you can go to numerous places at the start. I think there's 3 paths I had, and I've unlocked one here. I can talk to her and she will unlock, I assume, this direction somehow. But you've got a choice of 3 at the start, and while that's pretty good compared to Dark Souls 3, which had, I think, 1 choice, there was 1 area you could go to from warping. Dark Souls 1, obviously, because it didn't have warping at the start, there was a lot more choice, and the level design was just better. It wouldn't have had linear pathways like this. I mean, there were some, but there'd be little looping round bits and stuff. And in this main area, this next area, which I've already been through, it was just such a glaring example of incredibly sort of linear design. The levels in this game feel more like separate levels, and they did to a certain extent in 3 as well. But in Dark Souls 1, the sort of whole world felt connected. Yep, I'm trying to pull the handle, and I can't pull the handle. Oh, I don't need to, it's already open. I am stupid. Yeah, the world felt like one big world because it looped back around. It was very connected because you only got the warping sort of mid-game, and you had to earn it. It felt like you'd earned it. It was like a reward. Whereas this, you get it early on. As you can see, I'm good at ranged. Yeah, you get it early on, and it feels less earned. Not less earned, it feels less well designed because of that. They didn't have to create ways to loop back to that hub. If I wanted to go back to that hub in Dark Souls 1, there would probably have been... It's very nice visually. There probably would have been some place at the end of this kind of area where a ladder I kicked down or it looped back around, and you would have gone, oh wow, that's really good level design. And this, yeah, this doesn't have that. And 3 had it to a certain extent, even though it had warping. They managed to do that somehow in some of the levels. But in this so far, I haven't really noticed it at all. Especially not this one. As you'll see as I go through it, we can talk about the combat now. Which, if you've played a Dark Souls game, is quite simplistic. In terms of, you don't get many moves. You've got a roll. You've got a light and a heavy attack. I just wasted my soul barrage there. You'll see it's quite different for me because I am a sorcerer. You've also got block if you've got a shield equipped. And you can parry. Oh, so these guys actually woke up. They were sleeping before. But because I killed the boss of this area, they've woken up. Which is a bit of a pain actually, because those other guys are slow. These guys are quite fast. The other guys are quite susceptible to kiting, which is where you essentially back off if you've got a ranged attack. I mean, you can do it with this guy, but he's just quicker. He might, and that stunned him good. Because poise affects enemies as well. If you hit them hard enough, your attack will stagger them, which is what happens to you. It happens to me quicker than it would someone wearing heavy armour, because my armour's quite light. You've got that stamina bar in the top left. It's the green bar. And it's... Oh, there we go. I'm going to get hit twice. No, I dodge rolled it good. And that is very important to manage in this, in a way it was not in Dark Souls 3 as much. You could sort of roll a ridiculous amount in that game, because the last roll barely cost any stamina. And kind of fights sort of resulted in a lot of spamming the quick attack. Whereas in this, it feels a little bit more tactical. Even though you're seeing me just spam this magic, it's because I've picked a sorcerer. But with this guy up here, we'll do a bit of sword combat. So hopefully I can show you the backstab, and I'll try a parry. I've got a heal up. There's 2 ways to heal in this game. One is your Estus Flask, which you can upgrade with shards. You have to do that at the bonfire, the main one in Majula. I'll heal now. And you have to manage that quite well. Warping's also kind of got rid of that danger that you feel, because you can just warp from a bonfire. There's no getting to a new area and feeling like you're trapped there away from your hub, like you were in Dark Souls 1. So I've got this guy targeted. The targeting feels a bit better in this than 1. So I'm following him around. I can block a few times. Now, if I had very little poise, if he hit me even with my shield up, I would eventually be staggered. I'm going to try and get a backstab on him, but that'll involve him doing a move, maybe. And me trying to get behind. Backstabs are harder to do in this game than they were in... Well, there you go. I think I got him there. That's it. For 1, it's a bit tricky to know whether you've got one. Whereas it was a lot easier to tell in... Well, in 1 and 3. But yeah, as you can see, this area is not that interesting either. I mean, visually, it looks really nice. These sort of ancient ruins, but we're not really exploring an interesting part of it. We're exploring the sort of pathway, like the roadway in it. These guys are quite susceptible to falling off as well. I thought I was maybe going to fall. There we go. See, I nearly fell off after him as well. So yeah, I couldn't wait to get through this bit really, because even though the visuals were nice, it was just fighting these big armoured dudes over and over again. And you can't backstab these big guys. You can only backstab the little guys. Right, get this back out. I'll try and do them quite quickly, because you can't parry these guys either. But with magic, if I can't kite, I tend to try and do a bit of damage to them. And then try and use my sword so I don't waste, because you only get a certain number of spells. There is an item that lets you recharge your spells. There's another thing you might have seen there. He tracked me with his sort of rotating move. That wouldn't have happened in Dark Souls 1, which meant I could have got a backstab on him. But if they're doing like one of those overhand attacks, you notice how he like followed me around, and I do not like that at all. What I do like is that the enemies are a bit more aggressive. The AI, it will come out and fight you. Whereas in 1, it didn't really. In 3, if that had happened, it would have been a nightmare, because the combat in that was fast and frantic. It felt a bit more luck-based than it does in this. Maybe that made it a little more exciting at times, but whoops, I thought I had my magic stick out there. But yeah, it could sort of, it would result in you spamming the light attack and stun-locking enemies, or they would stun-lock you, because a lot of the enemies didn't seem to have any stamina. Whereas the slow pace of these enemies, you always get a chance to get a move in, because they don't have this unlimited stamina. And they're quite slow, a lot of them, so you can read their movesets, which I like. And Dark Souls 3 doesn't really have that. It also has sort of delayed actions on any movesets, so you can't really read it as well. This is a lot similar to the first Dark Souls in terms of its combat. It feels weightier, and I like that. The combat is pretty decent. Where it fucks up, though, is the enemy variety and design. Told you I was going to talk about that. As you can see, what we've been fighting so far, humanoids of varying sizes with varying different armor sets. And it's gone a bit samey so far. I think I've fought a few minions that do not have that. Oh, and we're being invaded by an actual player. This is the first... and I died anyway. That was quite lucky, actually, because the invader probably would have killed me. Hopefully he won't get anything for that. But yeah, like I said, when you are human, you can be invaded. I didn't know anyone was playing this anymore. That's the first time that's happened in about 15 hours of playing. He interrupted what I was saying about enemy types. Right, well, we won't bother going hollow again. I'm going to go back there and run past... oh, maybe we could go to the Lost Bastille, actually. Or, no... yeah, let's go to No Man's Wharf. Just show you this place. Because I can show you the more humanoid enemies. Because this is an area a bit further on. These are slightly different. They look a bit more like you. Right, we're here in No Man's Wharf. Show you a few more humanoid enemy types. You'll also be able to see how linear it is again. Right, I'm gonna actually use another human effigy. I'll just hope no one attacks me. I think one reason they might have used these human enemy types, because they do in Dark Souls 1 to a certain extent, and 3, but 3's the most imaginative, I think, of all of them. Because it's easier to read a human opponent's movements than it is, for instance, something like a dog. This dog, and there's a couple of sort of weird two-armed, they sort of walk on their hands, these like lizard things. But really it's just these humanoids so far. Even the bosses, and I will show you a boss soon that I recorded earlier. Because they're also the same, which is a bit of a shame. And while it does allow you to read the movements, it's kind of disappointing. It doesn't surprise you. Little imagination's gone into it. This is an NPC summon. And I can do that because I'm human. Some of these guys help you fight bosses. This one is something they added to Scholar of the First Sin, a few of these NPCs. You can also summon human players, but I haven't done that yet. And this just helps make the area a bit easier. Although it does up the enemy HP, so I don't know whether... It does help, I would say. Dark Souls is the kind of game, each one of them is something you can make easier. Because I know it puts a lot of people off, the difficulty. They've got a reputation for being difficult. But you can make it easier with things like upgrading Estus, summoning people. I think the health spike the enemies get isn't as good as the fact that you've got someone else help you. I mean, the fact that they distract the enemy and you can get extra hits on them is worth having someone around. I tend to not summon them for the actual level bit, but for bosses I do tend to summon them, although I didn't for the one I'm going to show you. So yeah, look, these guys as well. The only difference is their armour. They're a little bit taller. Even those massive armoured dudes, they were still like humanoid. There's nothing interesting about that or particularly memorable. And because I've done this area, I think I'm going to show you that boss now. And then I will warp to an area I haven't been to yet, because that's kind of... That is Dark Souls. Here's a non-humanoid enemy, by the way. These guys, they're scared of the light. That's quite a Dark Souls-y thing, to go somewhere you haven't been. That's the experience that sort of makes Dark Souls, in a way. That fear of the unknown, that you play it more carefully, because anything can kill you at any time. And I have found that the AI, while being more aggressive, sometimes tends to be, ow. Yeah, kind of like that. Kind of mobs you sometimes, which is very unfair in a game like this. Dark Souls is often quoted as being hard but fair, and if you get attacked by numerous enemies, that's not fair. Because there's not a lot you can do about it, especially if you haven't played through that bit before. That also goes for enemies that hide. There's certain areas in this game, moments in this game, where I've just been walking... I've still been walking carefully, but there'll be a trap or something, and I won't have read the message on the floor, because people can help you with messages. And I'll just get hurt, sometimes killed, because I just didn't know what was going to happen. And that's not particularly fair. I mean, probably only going to kill you once, but you have to waste an effigy maybe, and it's... yeah, that doesn't go with the whole hard but fair mantra. So disappointing. Anyway, let's go to that boss, because while I'm talking about the boss and the movesets, and the sort of disappointment of it, and most of the bosses I've fought so far actually, you'll also see another problem with that linear level design. Like, this one looked a bit more open, but there's one shortcut, and you get to the end of it, and it just takes you to the next area. There's no loop back, because it doesn't need one, because you've got the warping. And while I head to that, I'm going to show you that boss fight and talk a bit about it. Okay, here we are, and I'm showing you the pre-run to the boss, because it'll let me talk about that, because it's a chance to show off a bit more level design. Now, the boss for this area, the first boss, the main boss, as it were, it did have a fairly short run to it, which you unlocked by getting a key. And that happened a lot in Dark Souls 1, but as you can see here, I'm having to run all this way, and I'm just ignoring the enemies, because if you lose a bit of health, and then fight the boss, maybe you had to use an Estus on the way, it makes the boss even more frustrating if you have to do that run every time, and if you've lost your health. And I didn't notice that as much in Dark Souls 1, because it had all the shortcuts, and it had bonfires closer. Same as Dark Souls 3, there didn't tend to be runs up to bosses. There was one in Dark Souls 1 that was quite obnoxious, in Anor Londo, but generally they were quite good. This one was pretty obnoxious. I hope it changes later on. This is just the first impression, so... But as you can see with magic, you'd have to be a bit different fighting this boss if you were using a sword, say. I mean, I could have got out my sword, but I was doing more damage with the magic, so I had to stay quite a distance away, and he was quite quick. Dark Souls 3 has these super quick enemies and super quick bosses that can be quite frustrating to stay away from and to read, because they seem to have unlimited stamina. You can see with this guy, when he does a move, it's quite telegraphed, and he has a bit of a pause afterwards, so he can get in a few hits, or maybe one hit. If you're greedy sometimes, that can screw you over. So when you beat the bosses in this, and Dark Souls 1, as opposed to Dark Souls 3, you feel like it's maybe more skill, maybe not luck. Not that you didn't need skill to win in Dark Souls 3, of course you did, but occasionally you did just feel like you'd got some lucky hits in, or you weren't really sure what you were doing. You were just hacking away and you sort of lucked your way through it. You weren't reading the moves as much. And like I said, I tend to summon as well. But I hope the enemy design will change, because this guy is the most generic armored dude, floaty guy, the pursuer, and he pops up again, so technically good boss fights, but not surprising or interesting in terms of their design. Not very memorable. I've already fought 2 humanoid knights now, but I did it eventually with this one, as you can see. Not my first attempt, but I did it. See what I mean then about those bosses? Now this is a first impression, so it might get better, and the level design might open up a bit. It might get a bit better. There might be loot backs and sort of side areas like there were in 3 and very much so in 1. Because this is a game about exploration, because you take your time, like I'm going to do here, because I don't know this area. There could be things waiting, well, there will be things waiting to kill me. It's unexplored. I think that's what puts a lot of people off as well, because it's quite tense. And you do die a lot. And these messages never help, these online messages. In fact, sometimes I'm tempted to turn off the humanity and the online component, because these blood splatters appear quite a lot, and they sort of ruin the aesthetic a bit. This one's a bit more atmospheric, but it's still got that sort of softer feel to it. Like, everything would be crumbling and decayed in Dark Souls 3, and it'd be a bit more gothic, and there'd be slime on everything. Whereas in Dark Souls 1, it would be a bit more impressionistic, and I don't know, there'd just be more bodies, and it would feel darker in tone. Usually I have some kind of archery, but I don't think I have the stats at the moment, because the AI is quite susceptible to sniping from a distance. Just using a life gem. This game has other forms of health, which is a fairly... I think they added that because the Estus takes a while to use, because you've got to upgrade that adaptability skill to make your actions quicker. So I think overall, even if you haven't played... well, especially if you haven't played the others, although I would recommend Dark Souls 1 over this. But if you end up liking that, oh dear, right, this guy, well, you've just seen me beat him, but in Scholar of the First Sin, he was added as a kind of randomly occurring enemy, although I think actually the little areas he occurs in repeat. That was added in Scholar of the First Sin. I don't know what happens if you beat him. I guess you just get a lot of souls. But it's been more of an irritant, I think, at the moment. I will choose not to fight him. I guess it's for players that want more of a challenge. I don't know if he'll pop up again now he's disappeared. Bloody well hope not. Because I can't beat him again. I'm scared now that he's going to pop up again. These guys, I don't know how you're going to take these guys down as well if you don't have archery. Can I knock this down? I can! There you go. Destructible environments is a new thing. He didn't die to that, though. And then he could hack me up. I'll try and get a backstab on. Not a backstab, I'll try and do a parry for you. There we go. That got him. Didn't kill him, though, unfortunately. And now there's a... See what I mean about being mobbed? And how it's a bit unfair. But that tends to happen more when you don't know the area, so... Hopefully, because I will die, I've no doubt, on this area. And I'll have to redo it. I'm trying to parry him. But first I'm going to heal. So parries, essentially, sometimes if you don't do them properly, they just reduce damage. But if you do them properly, you can then riposte. It stuns the enemy, and it's hard to do. Most Dark Souls games you can get through without having to do it, because it's probably the hardest skill in the quite simplistic combat to master. But because a lot of the enemies are humanoid, including the bosses, you can do it on them as well, which is sometimes handy. But as you can see, I suck at it. I couldn't do it there. I'll try and get it done on one. If I find another humanoid enemy, because they're the easiest to read, you've got to time it right. It's very hard to do in Dark Souls 3. And I think... Oh, there's another bloody dog. I think overall, in terms of the combat, this may be my favourite. Although, obviously, it's ruined by the lack of enemy design. It's just more memorable. Dark Souls 3, I can remember a lot of the enemy types because they're interesting. They had dogs as well. They're not particularly interesting, but there was, you know, big monstrosities, like oozing with pustules and things, and it wasn't just all guy in armour. But in terms, I feel like it's more skill-based. Damn it. More skill-based than, say, bloody rolling barrels down. I bet that's going to explode, yeah. More skill-based, interrupting me, than, for instance, Dark Souls 3, which, yeah, resulted in spamming light attack and lots of rolling. Just blew yourself up, mate, but also meant you got out of the way of my attack. It's more similar to Dark Souls 1. I don't know if it's better than that, the combat. Dark Souls 1, again, had more memorable moments in the combat and in the bosses. So, in terms of that, it's more Dark Souls. So if you like the other two, then this is still worth checking out. I don't know what the bad rep is for, really. I wouldn't say it's for the combat. Maybe because the locations, though, are nice. Okay, you can't backstab these guys. But luckily I got him in a stun in that last one. Because, yeah, like I say, the locations look quite nice. Maybe it's because the path is quite linear. Maybe that's why a lot of people didn't like it. Miyazaki wasn't involved. They were used to these sprawling levels. Maybe the visuals... I mean, this is just another crumbling sort of fortress, slightly different. Just more fantasy castle-esque. But then Dark Souls 3 had just lots of cathedrals. Although it had some of the nicest looking areas in the game. Okay, and I've looped back round to somewhere I have been. So... now I'm lost, basically, which happens occasionally. You have to read the guide. But I would definitely say you should play this if you like Dark Souls 1 and 2 and have been avoiding this because of, I don't know, bad press it's got, bad fan reaction. There are problems, like the tracking of the enemies, like the sort of linear path that you have to go in the levels. Can I jump? No, surely not. Yeah, see, it's got 4 ratings. That sounds like bullshit. I'd have to open that door first. So yeah, I would say if you like Dark Souls, then it's good enough to warrant playing. Because it's different enough as well. I mean, they all feel very similar. But 3, the combat doesn't work as well. It's kind of like a Bloodborne style combat, which just doesn't work in Dark Souls because they got rid of poise, which is ridiculous. I don't know why they got rid of it. It fits with the game. Shields are almost useless in that game, and heavy armor types. Whereas in this, they're even more effective than they are in Dark Souls 1, but rolling's maybe not as effective. So check this out. If you've got it on Steam and you're avoiding it, then play it, especially if you like Dark Souls. If Dark Souls 1 is your favourite, then I think you will like this a lot. It might not be as memorable, you might not have as many memorable moments, but you will enjoy your time with it a lot. I'm enjoying it, I'm definitely going to finish it. Even some of the NPCs I've come across, because a lot of them are merchants, but then there are a few, like there was one in this tower earlier, who was someone I summoned for an earlier boss fight. She's sort of here, she's come from another land, she's a bit like you, doesn't know what's going on, doesn't want to go hollow, she's worried about it, and I assume there'll be some kind of story there. Dark Souls 3 was very much deja vu in terms of a lot of things, items, characters, the setting even, whereas this, it's a bit fresher. So playing it after Dark Souls 3, maybe I'd even say that that's the best way to do it, because yeah, it feels sort of different, more so than Dark Souls 3, even though the combat in that is so different. And there's goo monsters and embers. But that's all really I have to say about it. The gameplay is different enough that it's worth checking out. It's a combination. Actually, it shares very little with 3. But shares a lot with 1. And is different enough to warrant playing. And is similar enough for fans to like. So yeah, I'll see you next time.